thanks for sticking around. I know we've had 3 very long but very enriching and fascinating days. So I promise to be concise so that we can all finish the conference on time and exchange final comments and so. So first of all, I would like to say a little something about me. I'm a PhD candidate at the UNAM, which is Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México, but I did a research stay at the BTK, that's the Berliner Technische Kunsthochschule in Berlin, where I did part of my research. And actually, this is part of the work I'm doing. But for this presentation specifically, I will be focusing on how knowledge is created in collaborative communities of play, especially in those communities who play scientific discovery games. I will be discussing all these terms. So then a brief outline of how the presentation is structured. First, I will discuss the concept of collaboration, which is important to understand citizen science and how citizen science aims to incorporate or to attract volunteers from the general public. Then I will talk about digital games as a term for encompassing video games in general, how digital games are incorporated in citizen science and they become research instruments. I will address 3 examples of Folded, iWire, and Play to Cure, Genes in Space, to see how this works, and then I will do some final remarks. So then, first of all, why is collaboration important, or what exactly is that? To start, I would like to refer to the ideas of Pierre Lévy, who is an important philosophy of technology. He's French, and he said that the guiding principles of digital culture were interconnection, virtual communities, and collective intelligence. And they can be also understood as kind of steps that follow one another, like the emergence of the internet fostered, unlike any technology before, the creation of communities that could exchange ideas, and since they were virtually accessible without constraints of space of time, they could do constant contributions and exchange ideas. So they began forming virtual communities. These virtual communities range from people discussing gardening to other communities who focus on social causes, for example. And then these virtual communities also fostered the emergence of collective intelligence, which is defined by Lévy as the optimal use and synergy of intellectual energies and imagination, meaning when people, of course, these communities of collaboration are not exclusive to the digital age because we have had them around for many years. Research societies, scientific groups, dialogue among specialists, among peers. But what's important of the internet is that it fostered collaboration with many members around the globe in an easier way, without the constraints of space. Then it's also important to go back to the concept itself of collaboration that Jane McGonigal proposes in her book Reality is Broken, because she talks about collaboration as the joint effort of a community to accomplish something that could not be accomplished with one person. That's the main idea. We are all, the members of the community are joining efforts to achieve a very specific goal. And then she lists 3 very specific types of elements involved in this collaboration. The first one is cooperation, which is when all the members of the community act with a purpose toward a common goal. Then coordination, in which they share resources and they synchronize efforts to achieve something, and then co-creation. And this is the most important element of collaboration, because the community, the main objective of the community is to create something. They are creating a novel outcome that could not have been achieved if they had acted separately. So then, that's the basis for what later became citizen science, which is basically the effort from scientists to incorporate non-experts or the general public in their scientific research. This has two main ways of being done. The first one is distributed computing, and the other one is called crowdsourced science. I will briefly talk about the first one, because that's actually the basis for later incorporating a more active participation of, of users. In the first one, distributed computing, you're just, if you want to volunteer, you're just donating the computing power of your machine to run a program. And then computers are interconnected to analyze data. So there are a couple of active projects. There are several, but I will just talk about these two. That's SETI at home, that's the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And the other one is LHC at home, which is software for doing research in particle physics. So what you mainly do if you want to participate in these projects is you install some software in your computer, and the software doesn't interfere with the normal operations of your computer, and you let it run while you're doing other things. But then again, although you are participating in some level, you're not actively contributing with your ideas if you want to do that. Therefore, we have the other side of citizen science, which is called crowdsourced science. And the idea behind this is that scientists transform complex scientific tasks into something accessible, interesting, and engaging for the non-experts or the non-scientists. So you can think, like, if you're a scientist and you're doing research on proteins, on how proteins fold or join with each other, and you want to enlist the help of the people, how could you do it so that people don't see it as a dry topic or a very incomprehensible topic? And more importantly, you're talking to people who have no background in biochemistry. So that's when digital games come in handy, because they're the perfect tools to be incorporated in these kinds of scientific efforts. So I just want to briefly say that digital games are better suited for these kind of tasks more than other media, because as G points out, and he has done extensive research on how video games can be incorporated into educational environments, digital games provide simulations that allow the development of situated understanding. That means that when players are in an environment, they're actively testing hypotheses. They're in a game world where they can explore, they can interact, and they can decide to take a course of action, and if that doesn't work, they always, to effectively play a game, you have to analyze what you did, reflect on your mistakes, create strategies, enact those strategies, and according to the information you receive from the game world, you revise your strategy and then act on a new hypothesis. And that's how players operate in a general basis when they're playing, whether they're playing Pong or they're playing Dark Souls, which would be each one with its level of complexity. So digital play is a crucial activity through which players are constantly testing ideas and developing skills. Digital games are especially great tools to develop abstract thinking and solving problem skills, because, as I said, players are constantly participating in these virtual worlds. Then, how does this happen exactly when you incorporate digital games and scientific research? Is that you transform a scientific problem or question into a digital puzzle, into a gaming puzzle. And that's one way of engaging, well, the players. And actually, scientists recognize that players, through play, have been testing these problem-solving skills, so that's why they decided to start making digital games specifically aimed to solve scientific questions. So then the scientific problem takes the form of a scientific discovery game. These games are called, well, the term is used to refer to these games whose main objective is to provide solutions or to generate data that will be analyzed by scientists to be incorporated into research. And that also offers an additional challenge because the ones who designed these games are designing puzzles that to which they don't know the solutions. I mean, it's a puzzle that will be developed or solved again with the players, and then it will provide the basis for more research. And, well, as I told you, the researchers have been amazed on how players have come up with innovative solutions. And they have these puzzles provide ludic structures, such as tutorials, so that gamers can get familiar with what the game does, and reward systems, so that they know if they're solving the puzzles correctly or not. So if we make a very, very easy, if we put this in a diagram kind of way, you have a scientific problem, a researcher, and a research instrument. That can be an experiment or some other instrument. And then you turn that into a game, and then players can become part of the research team. Well, when they'll be providing solutions to these puzzles. So I will now briefly address three examples, and what I'm going to do is play some videos of the digital games, because I think it's easier if you see how this works, how they work. Otherwise, it's kind of abstract. I mean, I'm really convinced that to fully understand a digital game, you have to play the digital game, you have to have the experience, otherwise it's all very abstract and it's not well understood. So since we're not playing the game right now, we can at least watch the trailer videos or the intro videos that are found in their web pages. So the first one is Folded. Folded was the first game of this kind. It was released in 2008. And it is very, very important because it was like the forefather of all these kinds of games. Folded actually started as a software that you could run in your computers called Rosetta, but then people began looking at the simulations that were running in their computers, and then they said to scientists, hey, the simulations are good and all, but we would like to participate, and because we have seen what the program does, and we think we can find better ways to fold the proteins. So the scientists said, well, that's actually a good idea. And they made the Rosetta into a game, which is that. In the video, you can see those are proteins that need to be folded. It means they need to be joined following certain rules. For example, in the video, they're showing that proteins cannot have empty spaces. So what the game is doing is encouraging the player to find an appropriate way of eliminating these empty spaces. So whenever you can do that successfully, the game also gives motivation and rewards the player. There's a system score, and also there's an in-game chat, because players are encouraged to form teams. These are, of course, the tutorial levels, the beginner levels, but as you advance in the game, the puzzles become more and more complex. So then, in order to analyze as much data as they can, or to encourage also collaboration among players, players are told that they can form teams, that they can use the in-chat game. There are forums to discuss questions, to provide suggestions. And it's one of the most interesting things about Folded is that players have come up with better solutions to folding proteins that the algorithms have. So the creativity that players that have is essential to these kinds of projects. The other one is iWire, and as you will see in a moment, it looks very similar to Foldit in terms of graphics, and it is also well, a puzzle game, a 3D puzzle game. The objective of this game is to map neurons that will help researchers find out or better understand how we process visual information. As you can briefly see on screen, there's also an in-game chat. You're constantly encouraged to collaborate with others. They also have forums and wikia. And how you play the game is that you have to branch neurons. You can see two sides of the game. In one of the sides, you're seeing the 3D model of the neuron, and on the other side, you're advancing through the different parts of the neurons so that you can see how well you're branching it. You branch it by coloring it. And of course, as with the protein example, there are certain rules that need to be followed in order to map and branch the proteins. When you branch them, you see how these proteins form synapses with other proteins. So for example, they cannot have jagged edges. The edges have to be smooth. So if you have pointy edges, yes, you're not doing something right with your protein. The game has several tutorial levels precisely to familiarize the player with the puzzles. And as you complete the most advanced levels, you can gain access to the different projects or the different research projects that form the huge iWire project. There are other players that are constantly checking the works of novice players, let's say, and they also offer advice or they rank the mapping of the neuron. As you could see, you're always told, well, when you finish the puzzle, you submit the solution and then you get a ranking. And then you also get comments on your work. In both of these examples, the research papers that have resulted from using the data generated by players, they always address how players and the solutions they proposed were a big part of the research. So players are greatly recognized as a vital part of the project. And then the final game is called Play to Cure, Genes in Space. As you will see, the game looks visually very different from the others because the developers wanted to give it a more commercial look. So in this game, you're in charge of a spaceship that is going to be collecting element alpha, which is used to represent the genetic information found in some cancer tumors. So in the game, what you have to do is you have to follow the route with the most element alpha, which will help scientists spot patterns in cancer tumors and then incorporate that in research. This project was, as their creators say, it was very successful. However, they did note that they sacrificed a bit of accuracy to give the game a more attractive look. Because if you see this game and compare it to the others, it looks more like a commercial game, if we're going to use a label. So then this game, Play to Cure, is part of a bigger project because, as you can see over there, they started developing other games in which they were trying to balance out accuracy of the results with, with attractiveness, with a game that players would like to play. So I would like to point this out because I do recognize that there are some limitations, but even the Cancer Research UK recognized, okay, this is a valuable tool and we will keep working on it so that we can actually develop a game that is as good as the others. And these are just 3 examples because as you can see, if you do some research or if you Google them, there are many other games that are just to mention but a few. And I would like to just point out that in these games, you can see the concept of collaboration, not only among the players who help themselves while they're playing, but also between scientists and players, because scientists analyze the data generated by players, and players are engaged. They keep playing the game, so they're working together to generate new results, and they're working towards the advancement of science. So then to conclude, I would just like to give some final remarks. So I would like to say that digital games stimulate players' creativity in different ways than any other media. I know that that's a topic itself open to a lot of debate, but I'm truly convinced of that. And well, there's research to prove it. Digital games were created as very effective research methods. I'm not saying they're the best methods or they're better than others, but they're certainly doing, well, they're doing their part with the players' involvement, of course. And then we can also ask ourselves how we could do similar things in the arts and the humanities, which I recognize they have very different research methods, but we could see how to incorporate video games in a sociology experiment on maybe goodwill or bullying or something like that. And then we can see how new communities are emerging, new communities of play, whose only purpose is not to enjoy a game just for the pure fun or enjoyment of it, but they're actually contributing. At the same time they're enjoying doing something, they're contributing to research. And then I like these communities because they're creating knowledge in a collaborative form. And I think that's very important, because as they play together, they're thinking together and they're contributing to science. So in conclusion, I'm convinced that digital games provide new ways of thinking and approaching scientific problems, and then it's a good way of thinking and playing together. Thank you.